All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this first in our two-part webinar series for the NIMAC specifically for publishers and vendors. My name is Liz Schaller. I am the NIMAC manager, and I'm joined this afternoon by Nicole Gaines, the NIMAC project director. And today we will be talking you through kind of the basics of your accounts as NIMAC publishers and vendors, as well as the nuts and bolts of submitting files to the NIMAC. So today's webinar will occur in two parts. The first part will be walking through some PowerPoint slides going over NIMAC background information, how we validate files and the submission process and the certification process. And then Nicole will be going through a live demo on the website, showing you some of those things that we talk about during the PowerPoint, especially with regard to adding users, adding and replacing files, generating reports. So it'll be a pretty comprehensive overview. We'll go pretty quickly. We will pause a few times for questions, but feel free to pop those in the chat at any time. We'll be keeping an eye on it. And then I hope you will join us next week for the second part of this two-part series, where we will be getting into the resources that are available to you for producing NIMAS files, as well as some best practices and advice we have for metadata and XML tagging to produce the very best quality NIMAS files you can. We included the registration links for that second part of the series in the emails that I sent out to you. But if you need those, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to send those to you.
And just to kind of chime in, this is Nicole. I just wanted to also let folks know that this, in addition to having this video archived, the PowerPoint will also be available for you as a resource. We're happy to email that to you if you're interested, and it'll also be posted for download on our website if it's helpful for you as just a reference going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nicole. All right, so first let's get into some basics and background of the NIMAC. The National Instructional Materials Access Center, or NIMAC, was created by IDEA 2004, and it serves as the central national source file repository for K-12 textbooks and core instructional materials. We make NIMAS files available to states for use in producing accessible formats such as Braille for qualifying students in K-12. Files in the NIMAC are not distributed directly to students. This is one of the main questions that we get, and that you also might get if you're a publisher who fields questions from your customers. The files in our system are not something that can be given directly to a student. They do have to be transformed by an accessible media producer into a usable, accessible format for that student. The NIMAC has been in continuous operation since it opened in December of 2006. And states and districts have been able to require NIMAS in their textbook contracts since July of 2006. To date, we have received over 73,000 file sets from 170 publishers. And we recently hit a pretty major milestone. Over 50,000 files have been downloaded from the NIMAC for use in producing accessible formats for students with disabilities. So we're pretty proud of that. IDEA does not require that states work with the NIMAC, but all 50 states, as well as the 6 eligible territories and the Department of Defense, have chosen to do so. States that coordinate with the NIMAC agree to require NIMAS from publishers in their textbook adoption contracts, abide by the eligibility requirements of IDEA and copyright law in the use of NIMAS files, as well as to designate and manage a small number of authorized users for their state. This number is typically between 3 and 5 people. They are often at the SEA or LEA level, possibly in a school for the blind or an instructional resource center. And they're kind of like the main folks who are involved in the accessible format production workflow in their state. So access to the NIMAC, as described, is quite centralized. Each state that coordinates names a NIMAC state coordinator at the State Department of Education. This individual is responsible for designating and managing those authorized users who can access the repository and download files. Authorized users may also assign files for download to registered accessible media producers who are working on behalf of the state. So the only people who have full access to the NIMAC repository and everything in it are those authorized users. And then the accessible media producers like Braillists who may be in a school district or an IRC, those folks only have access to the files that are assigned to them by that authorized user.
And this is Nicole. I just wanted to chime in. There was a good question just now in terms of what was referenced when we mentioned SEA or LEA level. And thank you for catching the jargon there. That is kind of education language for state education agency, which is the State Department of Education, or local education agency, which just means school district. So thank you for asking that.
Yes, thanks. There are quite a few acronyms in this world, so apologies for that. So NIMAS eligibility. IDEA 2004 defines the eligibility requirements for receiving materials that are produced from NIMAS. These materials can only go to elementary and secondary school students who have a qualifying disability per the eligibility guidelines of the National Library Service, as well as an IEP. And the NIMAC, importantly, is not involved in determining eligibility for individual students. That responsibility falls to that district or that school IEP team. The NIMAS specification. So the NIMAS acronym stands for National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standard. And this is an XML-based source file format that is based on the DAISY standard. It is designed for use in producing formats such as Braille, DAISY, EPUB, and large print. And again, as mentioned before, it is not a file format that is intended for distribution directly to students. It's also important to note that it is the only format that the NIMAC can receive. We do a couple times reference a PDF in these presentations, and the PDF that is a part of the NIMAS file set is just used for identification purposes of the material. So only the title and copyright pages and occasionally the cover pages are required to be submitted to the NIMAC. And these are just used, they're used both by us to verify that the materials you submitted matches up with the ISBN, and then also for the user who has purchased the material to be able to look at it and verify that they're downloading the correct file. As a format that was defined in the IDEA 2004 regulations, the technical specification can only be updated through legislative or regulatory action. The NIMAC itself is not able to make changes to the NIMAS aside from minor changes to metadata requirements. Because IDEA 2004 is many years overdue for reauthorization, the NIMAS standard has not been updated since the IDEA regs were published. Throughout 2023 and 2024, the NIMAC will be reaching out to a range of stakeholders, including yourselves, to get input on what changes, if any, they would like to see to the specification. We are interested in how, from the publisher and vendor perspective, the specification could be improved, and input may support a formal request to the department to update the specification through regulatory action. We will be sure to communicate with you as early as possible, any opportunities to provide input on this, so please stay tuned. So what is in scope for the NIMAC? Under IDEA, the NIMAC is to receive printed textbooks and related printed core materials that are written and published primarily for use in elementary school and secondary school instruction and required by a state education agency or local education agency for use by students in the classroom. Now, neither the U.S. Department of Education nor the NIMAC imposes a definition of core. That definition is determined by the folks at the SEA or LEA who are purchasing or adopting that material. The NIMAC can accept a range of student-facing materials, which would include textbooks, workbooks, supplementary readers, and ancillary materials such as Blackline Masters. What is exempt from the NIMAC? So materials that the NIMAC does not generally receive include trade books, college textbooks, reference books, materials published before 2006, and teacher's editions or ancillaries for the exclusive use of the teacher. NIMAS files cannot be used to produce accessible formats on behalf of teachers. Again, they can only be used to produce formats on behalf of qualifying students. The NIMAC can accept NIMAS for digital instructional materials as well. Digital materials composed primarily of static text and images, and which have a unique ISBN, can generally be converted into NIMAS. Digital products that are interactive, like games, software, videos, or many types of adaptive materials, are not suitable for NIMAS. The Notice of Interpretation states that digital instructional materials that meet the WCAG 2.0 AA accessibility criteria are exempt from NIMAS as well. And for more information on that, please see our FAQ on NIMAS and digital instructional materials. Let me see, I think I have that link here. I'll pop that in the chat in case anyone is interested in taking a look. Under IDEA, oh, sorry, Nicole, did you have
I was just going to interject and just say that for folks who may not be familiar with the Notice of Interpretation, this was something that was issued by the department back in May of 2020. And before that, we were only able to accept NIMAS files for print-based instructional materials, but they did issue a Notice of Interpretation saying that the legislation does not preclude the submission of files for digital instructional materials when those can successfully be converted into the NIMAS format. Thanks.
Oh, thanks. Yep, that's great, helpful context. So under IDEA, states and districts that work with us should always require NIMAS in their purchase contracts. Again, that is the only way to require that NIMAS files are submitted to the NIMAC. However, with about 14,000 school districts in the United States, we know that this doesn't always happen. In instances where there is a need for a file for an accessible format and it is not already in the system, one of our authorized users will reach out to us and request that material. If the material is within scope for the NIMAC, we will reach out to the publisher to request a file when that accessible format need has been identified. We do greatly appreciate the publisher's assistance and support of students in response to these requests. I know many folks on this call today respond and help us out with these requests, so we greatly appreciate that. Again, NIMAS files are only used in the first production of an accessible format. Once produced, materials can be reproduced for additional qualifying students. So if you are someone at your publisher who helps your customers locate accessible formats for materials, your best resource for doing that would be the LUI database of accessible materials. This is where accessible material producers throughout the United States list the Braille and other formats that they have already produced, which helps to not duplicate effort, particularly when it comes to Braille production, which is very costly and time-consuming. We are also always happy to help your customers if they are looking for accessible formats, so feel free to send them our way as well. Now let's get into a little bit about publisher accounts and file submission. So managing your inventory. Accounts are made available to publishers and they enable you to search, view, and download your inventory in the NIMAC, export inventory reports, manually upload new inventory to the NIMAC system, and as well as manually replace inventory. Additional system features or tools that are provided include the ability to create additional user accounts for others at your company or your conversion vendors. As well as there are resources such as the NIMAC Validation Wizard that can be downloaded, as well as the OPF metadata Excel to OPF tool that's available in your account as well. And Nicole is going to show you some of those things during the demo portion of the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to her now, and she's going to talk you through validation.
Great. Thanks, Liz. Before we transition into talking a little bit more about that, are there any questions about any of the material that we have covered so far, any of the kind of the basic parameters of the NIMAC or policies or definitions or anything like that? We're happy to take any questions if you've got questions before we kind of move on to the next section here. It doesn't look like there are questions, so I will go ahead and move on. So as a part of working with the NIMAC, you are probably really interested in knowing about how you can use your account to submit files, how you can work in your inventory. And so this next piece here, we're going to talk about the file submission process, starting with file validation. File validation is really important because when you upload a file to the system, the very first thing that's going to happen is an automated validation process will happen. And if your file fails validation, it will be rejected for upload, and you don't want that to happen. The NIMAC has always made a free validation tool available to publishers and vendors. This can be downloaded from the resources tab in your account, and I'll show you where that is when I do the demo later. But I would like to just note that early last year, we had a refurb, a new and improved NIMAC validation tool, which replaced the one that was developed in 2006. And this same level of validation is now what is present in the NIMAC online system. So as in the past, we do ask that publishers and vendors run all of the files that you're going to submit through the validation tool from the NIMAC before you upload them. So again, as I mentioned, if the file fails, it will not be ingested into the system. And one other advantage in terms of why use this tool, most folks are going to have some kind of XML validation tool built right into whatever software you're using to create that NIMAS file. But in addition to some basic DTD checks or checking that the XML is well formed, this tool also makes sure that all referenced images are present, that all images that are present are referenced in the OPF, and also that there are some new checks for missing or invalid OPF metadata that are very NIMAS specific. It can really help you to avoid issues before you upload the file. So we just really encourage you to take advantage of this tool. In addition, there is some best practices feedback for some issues. And what we mean by that specifically with regard to validation is, for example, almost all K through 12 instructional materials submitted to the NIMAC include page numbers. It's rare but possible for pagination not to be present, but the new validation wizard, for example, if there are no page numbering tags in your file, it'll pick up on that and let you know, hey, this is not an error that's going to prevent the file from being uploaded, but the NIMAC will ask you about this, and you may want to check and make sure that this is what you intended for this particular file. So we're also really excited to note that we now have both Windows and Mac compatible versions of the Validation Wizard. And again, they're both downloadable from your account. And it's really a very simple and intuitive user interface to run a file through the Validation Wizard. You basically navigate to wherever that zip file is on your machine, click Validate, and then the results will display on the screen. You can also export the output as a CSV file if you'd like to open it up in spreadsheet software or manipulate it in some other way. This screen capture that I'm showing here is just showing where that browse button is for you to locate that file. And then once you've done that, you click validate, and that's all there is to it. You'll see a little green bar that, and actually if it's a really small file, it may validate so quickly that you don't even see the little green bar. If it's a larger file, you'll see that kind of progress bar. If it's a successful validation with no errors, warnings, or best practices feedback, you will just see a little green banner that says successfully validated the NIMAS package, and you know that you are good to go. Now, in terms of the type of validation output that you may see, there are 3 different types. First one is errors. These must be corrected or the file will not be accepted for upload into the system. Warnings are issues where correction is recommended but not required. And best practice is just kind of information such as that pagination thing that I mentioned a moment ago, that it's what we're seeing is a little bit unusual. You may want to just take a second look. This screen here I'm showing is actual output from validation of a file that had numerous errors. I think we actually created this file to include many, many errors. I don't think it's not a real file. So, but this is what you would see if you had a file that had many errors and also warnings and also best practices issues. So it's kind of helpful to know that the first line that you'll always see in that summary will be the errors. And in a similar way, the first lines that will display in the output will also be the errors. So you can really kind of zero in immediately on, hey, these are the things I absolutely have to fix. You'll also notice that kind of going across the screen, there are columns that identify which file the issue is seen in, what kind of error is present there. And usually you'll also see the location in the file and descriptive information regarding what the problem is. So it would be our hope that when you see this output, you will have all of the information that you need in order to resolve the issue. But if you have any questions or you're just like, I'm just really not sure what this is telling me, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to help with that. A final thing that's kind of adjacent to file validation is that occasionally and this is mostly with batch deliveries because you'll note it right away if you're using the manual upload process, but occasionally FTP deliveries, you will see that they have failed because the zip file was corrupt. And sometimes this is just something that happens in the file compression process, on the vendor's end. We just kind of recommend that before you put those files on the FTP, if you're delivering by batch, just click it and open it. If you can open it up again, it's probably fine and good to go. But that's just kind of a quick check that you can do to help prevent the delivery of a file that is just not going to be able to process. So the next thing I'm going to talk to is I'm actually going to dive into the file submission process. So you've created your file, you've validated it, you are ready to deliver it to the NIMAC, either by manually uploading it or delivering it by batch. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about manual file upload. The system itself will support files up to 300 megabytes each to be uploaded one at a time using your NIMAC account. And basically you can do that from where you land in your account. Basically, whenever you log in, your inventory is going to be your landing page. And when we're actually going to take a look at it in just a second, where that add inventory button is, that's what you're going to use. That option is what you're going to use if you're uploading a file for an ISBN that's not already in the system. This ISBN it's not there. If you have a file that you want to replace an ISBN that's already in there, you would just actually you'll look for that file. You could search for that file, or if you have a very small inventory, you might even be able to just page to it. But you will actually have a replace zip file option for any file that's in your inventory that's not already certified. And that's what you would use to actually replace something that, for example, is in your uncertified inventory. So this is a screenshot here showing you precisely where these two things are on your screen when you're logged in. So that add new content is toward the top of the screen. The replace zip file is right there in the brief record display for the record itself. And again, you can use an ISBN search or a title search if you need to zero in on the specific file that you're wanting to replace. The reason that this is important is that sometimes what will happen with a manual upload is if you go to add new content and that file is already in the system, it will tell you actually this ISBN is already in the system and you cannot upload this. And so I think sometimes that can be confusing for folks, because it may seem like, oh, so I can't replace the file. You absolutely can, but you just can't use add new content because in that case, it's thinking that you're trying to add something brand new, create a new record, and that's not really what you want to do. You just want to replace a file that's associated with an existing record. So again, as we discussed a few moments ago, when files are uploaded, the file first undergoes an automated validation process. And if the file fails, the system is going to show a detailed message. And what you're basically going to see is the same messaging that you would have seen if you'd run the file through the validation wizard. So kind of another reason why running it through that validation can save you some time later. If the file passes the validation, then what's going to happen is the system will automatically extract the metadata from the OPF file that you have submitted along with your NIMAS file. And so this is kind of nice because, you know, that metadata that you're providing there, that's going to be used to create the system record for that file. The system is going to open that up on a page where it can be reviewed and edited and then saved. And so that's kind of an extra step in terms of if you need to make any changes, you can do that at the point of upload. And then once the file is saved, it's going to automatically appear immediately in your uncertified inventory. Okay, so that's kind of the manual upload or manual file replacement. Now, in terms of batch delivery, files up to 300 megabytes, again, they can be manually uploaded, but I would like to note that upload time is going to be slower the larger the file is. So due to the upload times, you may want to consider just delivering files that are over about 250 megabytes by FTP. In terms of using the FTP to deliver files, there's no minimum or maximum file size for submitting by FTP, and there's also no minimum or maximum number of files. If you've got one file to upload, but it would just be easier for you to send it by FTP, you're welcome to do that. Not a problem. So let's get into the FTP delivery in a little bit more detail. So if you're familiar with FTP and you've used that before, you will know that whenever you have to deliver a file, there's going to be a host location. In this case, our system vendor Overdrive, they are the ones who manage this process, and they're the ones that have that FTP server. The name of it is transfer.overdrive.com. That's where you're going to go to deliver the files. And you're also going to need a login and password for the FTP. And so that's a separate login to your NIMAC account login. So if you don't yet have an FTP login and you need one, it's easy to request one. You can just send your NIMAC login ID to Overdrive at NIMAC-support@overdrive.com and just say, I'd like to request an FTP login associated with this NIMAC account, and they'll get that set up for you. So basically, to kind of recap on that, if you're a publisher, you will need to create a NIMAC sub-user account. We'll take a look at those in a moment for each conversion vendor that needs to upload files on your behalf. And if you are a vendor, the converse of that is that you will have a separate FTP login for each publisher that you work for. One little thing that I like to just mention that's a little bit quirky about the automated processing for the NIMAC is that we need to ask that when you are submitting files to the FTP that you only place them on the root directory. And this just basically means that we ask that you not put them in a folder or any kind of full folder structure. The reason for this is that the way that the automated process works is it goes through the FTP and it looks in everybody's FTP account and it's only looking in that root directory. So if you put it in a folder, it basically hides it. And it's not going to be picked up for processing. So we just want to avoid that by, if you use folders to manage your work, then that's great, but just don't move those folders over when you're moving the files. You still can select as many files as you want. You can select 100 files and move them over all at once. Just don't move them in the folder. So if you have any questions about that, just let us know. So an important thing that's associated with FTP deliveries is the daily FTP delivery report. And it's daily in the sense that FTP deliveries are processed overnight each night. And so the next morning, anyone who has submitted files by FTP the prior day will receive an automated report that details the processing results. Now, it's important to note that the report is going to go to the email address associated with the FTP login. So it's going to be the person who's associated with the NIMAC account that requested the FTP login. And basically, if you're a vendor that does have multiple publishers that you work with, you're going to receive a separate report for each publisher. One important thing that has become a little more salient in recent years as nefariousness online has become more and more significant. Spam filters have become stronger and stronger. And so one of the things that can happen with regard to automated emails, like the ones that come from the system, for the daily reports is that they do come from a server, and the email address is noreply-nimac@overdrive.com. And if you find that you're not receiving these emails or they're going to your junk folder, you may need to whitelist that email address or the overdrive.com domain in order to successfully receive the emails. If you find that you're having issues with that, let us know. We'd be happy to try to see if Overdrive can help you with those, but I think usually whitelisting does successfully address that issue. So when you receive the FTP report, we just say to folks, please be sure to review them each time you receive one, because this is your only notification if an FTP delivery fails. So if you didn't get the report, or you didn't look at it and something failed, then now obviously the other way to check that is you can always look at your inventory. Hey, this is not in my inventory, but you don't want to have to do that. So you do just want to be sure each time that you receive one of those to take a look at it and make sure everything was fine, and if not, address whatever issue it was. So again, because that email address is going to be associated with the person who set up the FTP account, if that person leaves or if their email address changes, please be sure to notify Overdrive so they can update and make sure that you continue to get those daily reports. Or conversely, they could also just create a new FTP account for you if that is the better thing to do. So when you get this daily report, you're going to see at the top a summary of the results. And so basically, if the report shows no failed uploads, you don't have to take any further action, and you're just done. So it's very quick to just take a look at that. However, if it does show there are failed uploads, then you're going to want to look at the details the column and address the issue, and then just deliver the file again. So what we see on this screen here, this is an actual report that shows processing for 2 files that were new titles, 2 that were resubmissions, and everything is successful. So basically, if you look in that upper left corner and everything is successfully processed, you're good. You'll also see under the second to the right column, there's a results column, and that's also going to show you what the output is. So that it's pretty straightforward, hopefully fairly intuitive there. This screen here, that's showing you a report that shows that one title did fail to process. The results screen shows failure, and then under the details screen, it shows you the specific details of the problem that caused the upload to not be successful. So similarly to the validation output, if you are not sure what those details mean or what change you need to make in order to get the file to be accepted, please just reach out. We're happy to provide additional information or look into that for you. So again, the daily report is your official notification, and if you have any questions about an error, just let us know. Once you've made the correction, you can just send the file again by FTP, or you can manually upload it, whatever's most convenient. The main thing is that you don't have to provide any special notification to Overdrive or to NIMAC about the resubmission of the file. And then that new delivery will show up on the subsequent report, and you can again verify that at that point that the file has uploaded successfully, and you'll also see it in your uncertified inventory. So one caveat here, when I was talking earlier about that, the button to re-upload a zip file, to replace zip file in your inventory, in one case where you will not see that little button is if you are looking at your certified inventory, and this is intentional. This is to just prevent the accidental overwriting of a file that's already been certified. This doesn't mean though that you can't replace files that are in your certified inventory. Sometimes publisher would like to resubmit a file for a more updated printing or for some other changes, and that's totally fine. Just let us know, and what we will do is we will remove that file temporarily out of certified status. We'll put it installed so that it can be replaced, and then it will be reviewed and placed back into the certified inventory status. So I'm taking a quick glance here just to see if there are any questions. It doesn't look like there are. So I'm going to move ahead to the last thing that we're going to talk about before we take a look at the actual NIMAC system in your account, and that's file review and certification. So the way that this works is, again, newly uploaded files are going to show up in uncertified, and again, we automatically know when those, you don't have to give us any notification that, hey, I just uploaded 5 files to uncertified. We will see them there. They automatically go into the review queue, and generally we will review materials in the order that they're received, but we're also happy to expedite the file review if there's an immediate need, if you have a deadline. We especially want to be sure to prioritize if there's a student out there who, they need Braille today. We want to try to make sure that that material can be produced as soon as possible. So the other piece of this is that if there are any issues identified in the file review, we will contact you with any questions or feedback. So again, so basically, when files are certified, they do appear in your certified inventory. And then in addition to that, the super user or the primary account holder at the publisher will receive an automated email with a digital certificate number. And this is kind of a unique number that you can use to just demonstrate to customers, hey, this file was submitted to the NIMAC, it was accepted into the NIMAC. And you can also add up to 3 additional email recipients for these emails. Just let us know. We're happy to add those to your account. But the other side of that is if somehow you missed the email or you didn't save the email, those numbers are permanently available for you to view in the system. And they're also a part of any report that you export from the system. So you always have access to that data. So in terms of the file review checks, so once that file is in the uncertified inventory, it's passed the validation process, there is a manual review for the file before it's actually accepted into the system, into the certified inventory. And kind of as an aside on that, we've talked a little bit about stalled inventory and uncertified inventory and certified inventory. And in terms of the users who are out in the States, they are only able to view your certified inventory. So up until that point, your files are not available to other folks to be downloaded and to be used. They have to go through that certification process first. So in addition to checking the metadata, it's really important to us to ensure that folks can find your materials. So having that metadata correct and complete is a high priority for us. And we also do some additional checks for things in the XML, looking for some required tags to make sure that they're present, and checking for the tagging on some specific items like table of contents and glossary. There are certain structures in the XML file that are really closely associated with the usability of the file. And if there are errors, then it really can hang up, like Braille production and so forth. So there's some specific things that we do look for. We will also make a cursory review of alt text if alt text is present. But it's really important for us to kind of emphasize that we don't receive print books and we don't do a page-by-page comparison to evaluate the tagging in the XML. So while it's unusual, it is possible that there could be an issue with your file that is only detected at the point where somebody is using that file to produce Braille or another accessible format. So again, not common, but it can happen that occasionally we will have to go back to a publisher after a file has been certified and say, a problem has been detected and we need for you to fix it. Generally speaking, if there's something that needs to be fixed, we're going to let you know about it in that file review process. I'm very happy to let folks know that NIMAC staff can and routinely make minor metadata corrections in the system at the point of file review, and that really prevents a lot of files from having to be resubmitted. And just kind of as an example of that, say that we get a file in and the metadata says copyright 2020, but the PDF along with the file clearly shows, hey, the copyright is 2022. That's something that we can just correct in the system, that it's a change that we can make for you. The other thing that's kind of nice about that is we can actually save that change not just to the system record, but to the OPF, so that the metadata will also be correct in that file, as it travels, to the user and is in the system going forward. Problems in the XML or the PDF do require vendor correction and resubmission of the file. And so, we will try to get that input back to the vendor as quickly as we can and as detailed as it needs to be. If you have additional folks that you would like to be looped in on that, there are some companies that we know of where they're like, if you have feedback for the vendor, loop me in, I just like to know. And so we're always happy to do that, but generally we're going to send it to the person who delivered the file or uploaded the file. And those files are then placed in stalled inventory while we await the corrected file. The last thing I want to mention is just the file review timeline. This is something that can vary quite a bit depending on the number of files that we receive. As Liz mentioned earlier, we've received files from 170 publishers. Fortunately, not all at the same time, but the number of files that we receive at any given time does fluctuate a lot. So if you are submitting files during a period where submissions are fairly light, we might actually get those files certified the day that they are uploaded to the system. In other cases, if we have a lot of items in the queue, it could take 1 to 2 weeks or possibly even longer. Occasionally, we'll receive programs that have maybe 800 or even 1,000 files. Those take a little bit of time to work through. If you have a certification deadline, or again, if you have something that's a priority and immediate need, just let us know that at the point of submitting the files. We do encourage you to do your best to submit files at least 2 weeks in advance of a deadline. And that just helps ensure that if there are any issues, you're not cutting it too close. If there's something that the vendor is going to have to correct before we're able to certify the files. And again, usually we certify in the order that materials are received, but we're happy to prioritize to help meet a deadline. This page here, I just wanted to make a pitch for our informational website. That's nimac.us. That's where this presentation is going to be archived, as well as the PowerPoint, and other resources are also available there. So if you've not visited, there is a specific section of the website just for publishers and conversion vendors, and we encourage you to take a look at that. So we're going to move on now to our live demo. Before we move on to that, though, I just want to also say nimac@aph.org. That is our email address. We welcome any questions that you might have. And we also do have a toll-free number in the US, 877-526-4622. And we are happy to take your calls. So with that, I'm going to switch gears here, and we're going to just take a few moments to actually look at your account and walk through some of the features that we've discussed this afternoon. I want to start out by just going to the login screen. And if you've logged in before and your browser has saved your credentials, that's the easiest way to do things. I just want to kind of make a side note here that most of us have about 1 billion logins to different sites these days, and most of the time our username is going to be our email address. And so I just wanted to note that in our system, there's a different user ID protocol in terms of the way that those user IDs are structured. So the reason that I mentioned that is a lot of times publisher users are not in the system a lot. And if they've forgotten their password, they'll go to forgot password and then they'll put their email address in. So if you haven't used the system in a while and I did the forgot password and I never heard back, you may just need for us to tell you what your login ID is, and we're happy to do that. So just let us know if we can ever help with that. It's one of those things that it's not quite as intuitive nowadays with the way that emails are so consistently used as login IDs. So here we are, we're logged into our test account here as a publisher. And so just to kind of get oriented, as I mentioned before, your landing page is always going to be your inventory, which you can scroll through. You can page through it. This actually is an account that does not have much inventory in it, but if you had multiple pages, you could page through. You can also search your inventory by title or ISBN up here in the right-hand corner, and you can also apply the filters over on the left hand to your entire inventory or after you do a search. So these are just helpful filters if you need to zero in on specific inventory that is in your account. One filter that may be especially useful for you is the very top one, which is status. This is where you're going to find where your inventory is in those 3 statuses that I mentioned earlier: certified, uncertified, and stalled. In this particular case, there are only 8 files and they're all in uncertified, but this is where you're also going to see where those other inventory categories are. And if you only want to view one of those categories, you can choose which one you want to see and zero in on those. Another thing I do like to point out is that if you look over toward the right, there is a button that says export. This is basically a way that you can generate an inventory report anytime you want on some of your inventory or all of your inventory. Again, this is another feature that you can use on everything in your account or after you do a search. And this is just going to create a CSV file on the fly that you can go in there and manipulate and use however you would like to use the data. As I mentioned earlier, the certificate ID information for all of your certified inventory lives in the system. And if you use this export button to generate a report, all those numbers will be there. So that can just be a helpful thing for folks to know. So the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these options up in the right-hand corner. In addition to the search bar, this is where you can go to add sub-users. You'll see that there's under user information, there's a My Account and My Sub-Users. There's also a My Downloads page. If you actually add something to your downloads, then this is where you will go to complete the download process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And underneath that, that's where you're going to see the add new content and the transform Excel to OPF. And this is the tool that Liz briefly referred to earlier. This is an optional tool in the system where you can upload an Excel file and create correctly tagged, correctly formatted OPF metadata. Completely optional, but if you're interested in trying it out, there is an Excel template that's available to you, which is found on the next tab over, which is the Resources tab. And we're actually going to take a look at that now. This is where you can download either the Windows or the Mac version of the Validation Wizard, and that you can also download that NIMAC metadata template if you would like to give the Transform Excel to OPF tool a whirl. The last thing that we have on this page is reports, and this is simply, again, it's an optional feature where you can do a report of the downloads of your inventory by NIMAC users. It's available to you if it's helpful. As another navigation pointer, if you want to go back to your landing page at any time, all you have to do is go over to the left-hand corner and click the NIMAC logo, and that will take you back to your landing page. So now I'm going to take just a moment and talk with you a little bit about, again, that add new content. This is where you're going to go again if you are going to add new inventory to the system. If you were to click replace zip file, you're actually going to see the exact same pages. So I'm only going to walk through the add new content, but I want to just kind of give you a sense of what this looks like. Fairly intuitive. You just navigate to the file that you want to upload. You choose that zip file. You click open and then you click upload. And so in this case, it's a really small file, so that metadata extraction happens really quickly. If this were a larger file, one of the things, again, that's happening when you first do that upload is that it is doing a file validation process. And so it could actually take a few seconds for that to complete. So don't worry about it. If you've got a file that's 400 megabytes and you're kind of waiting, that's normal. It's just a matter that it takes a little bit of time for that validation to happen. So again, once that metadata is open on the screen, you can scroll down and it's just basically going to show you every bit of metadata that was extracted from your OPF. And if you want to make changes at this point, you can. If you don't need to make changes, then that's also fine. I do want to take this opportunity to mention one thing that's a little bit quirky about the NIMAC system, and it's actually an intentional feature that we have in the system to avoid the accidental upload of files to the wrong publisher's account. And the way that we do this is that each imprint that is associated with your company is connected with your company in this system. So in other words, we kind of have a place on the back end of the system that has all of the imprints that are in the NIMAC and the specific publisher or publishers. Occasionally there's more than one publisher that shares material from the same imprint, but usually it's a one-to-one kind of situation. So what we see here is where it says select publisher, this is an indication that the publisher that's in the OPF is not one that's associated with this account. So that's kind of a trigger for one of two things. It's either, are you uploading a file to an account that you don't mean to be uploading it to, or more commonly, you may have a new imprint that's just not set up yet for this publisher. So if it's the latter, then all that you need to do is contact us, nimac@aph.org. Let us know, hey, we've got a new imprint that we need for you to add for this publisher. We can do that. It's usually a really quick process. And then you will then see that option along with the pick list of other imprints that are associated with that account. So if there are any questions about that, just let me know. In this case, I'm just going to choose one of the other imprints that's associated with our test account. And then when I click save, you will get a confirmation that it was successfully added. And then if I go back and click that NIMAC button again, and I'm actually going to choose my sort by update date, most recent, I see that the file that I just uploaded, it's right there immediately. So there's no lag. It's right there in your inventory immediately. Okay, so the next thing that I want to just spend a little bit of time about, we talked earlier about the importance of having sub-users, especially if you are needing that FTP access. And so I want to show you the process of creating new sub-users for your account. If you are a publisher, you really there's no limit to the number of sub-users you can have. If there are additional folks at your company who would like to have access and be able to view the inventory or possibly download the inventory, you are welcome to set those up, and you can set up as many vendor accounts as you need as well. So if you need to add a user, you just click the add user button, and it's really super simple. You just need a name and an email address. What I do want to talk about just for a second, though, is this user role, because we talked about vendor accounts and publisher accounts. And I do want to note that there are actually two different types of accounts that you can choose. The publisher account has kind of full functionality with your account, whereas the vendor functionality, it provides everything that a conversion vendor needs to work in your inventory and submit files. But there are a few things that the vendors are not able to do. For example, they are not able to download inventory. They're not able to generate the download report, and they're not able to create additional accounts. So generally speaking, if it's a conversion vendor, the vendor account is the better type of account to choose for those users. Once you've created your user and you've saved the changes, the system will automatically email them a user ID and a password, and then they will show up on this screen. As you can see here, we've got two users who are set up here as additional users for this account, and actions that you can do for your sub-users who already exist. You can edit their name or their email address, or you can just delete them. You know, if they're a vendor that you no longer use, you can just delete them. If there's somebody whose their email address changed or their name has changed, you can just make those edits directly in the system. Okay, so the last thing that I want to really talk about is that file downloading. If you are a publisher user, you are able to download your own inventory, and this is mostly something if you had a circumstance, and the example that I always like to use is that many years ago we had a school in Canada who was needing to create Braille for one of the files in the system, and because of the limitations on the NIMAC, we don't provide services to folks in Canada, so we were not able to help them. However, it was an option for the publisher if they had the rights and were inclined to do so, that they could download that NIMAS file themselves and supply that directly to the school or the Braille producer for the student in that case. So you can do that. Now, what I would like to note is that similarly to our authorized users, if you add a download, and I'm just actually going to choose to download this file. If you choose to download an item, what will happen is that the file will be fingerprinted and watermarked behind the scenes. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a part of that kind of split process where we don't want you to have to kind of sit and wait for that fingerprinting and watermarking and all of that stuff to happen. So you can continue to work in the system while that's going on. And then to complete the download, you just go to the My Downloads page. And once you get there, you will see under Actions, if that pre-processing has completed, you can click the download button and the file will be available to you. One thing that's really important is that because those files that are downloaded from the NIMAC are fingerprinted and watermarked, they've got that DRM in there and it's permanent. We do ask that you not use downloaded files as a basis for files that you need to re-upload into the NIMAC. If you're needing to make changes to a file or do something with it, maybe you've got a national edition file, you don't have it archived, the vendor doesn't have it, but you'd really like to take that and use it as the basis for a state edition. We can get you an unwatermarked file through Overdrive for that purpose. So just let us know if you're needing help with that. And with that, that really covers the topics that I wanted to go over today. If there are any questions about anything that we covered or anything we didn't cover, I'm happy to take any questions about that. And I do notice that Liz has put the short exit survey into the chat, and I would just say if you guys could just please take 1 or 2 minutes to respond to that. It's super helpful for us in developing future trainings, and it also really helps us with our mandatory reporting back to OSEP for the project. So it's just super helpful all the way around if you could just take a moment and respond to that survey. And is there anything else, or Liz, is there anything that you'd like to add before we wrap up for this afternoon?
I don't think so. I think you got it covered. I'll just reiterate that next week we have part 2 of our webinar series. Those will be on Wednesday and Thursday. I will send out reminders early next week about those if you haven't registered already, or if you have, just to remember to join us for those. And we're going to really get into the nitty-gritty about producing NIMAS files and best practices.
Yes, we hope to see you there. That will definitely be a webinar for the folks who are really in the weeds, and so we look forward to engaging with you guys with that one. So, okay, well, if there's nothing further, then thanks everyone so much for making time to join us today. Please, as always, do reach out if we can be of any assistance or help, and we just look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks so much.